Good afternoon. My name is Mary McGowan, and I'm CEO of WomenHeart, the National Coalition for Women with Heart Disease. WomenHeart is the leading voice for the 48 million American women living with heart disease, the leading cause of death of women. Thank you for joining us today on WomenHeart's panel on access and non-medical switching. Last year, WomenHeart conducted a survey of women living with heart disease and discovered that many participants had skipped or delayed their medications or treatment due to access issues, which is why we're having this panel today. We will hear from our patient, a provider, a government agency, and a pharmacist to explore how to address this issue. The panel discussion will last for approximately 40 minutes and will be followed by question and answer session. We will be collecting questions throughout the session. For our Facebook audience, please submit your questions in the comment box throughout the discussion. WomenHeart would like to thank Janssen Pharmaceuticals for making this panel possible. Our esteemed panelists, our live audience, and all of you who are watching via Facebook Live. We are looking forward to a very interesting discussion. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Marc Boutin. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Health Council. Marc is a leading voice for greater patient involvement at every stage of healthcare and increasing the patient voice in public policy, drug development, and improving the health delivery system. WomenHeart is a proud member of the National Health Council. Thank you, Marc, for moderating today's discussion.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it. And thank all of you here at WomenHeart for being here. And for those of you who are watching live, we're looking forward to this discussion on non-medical switching. And we're going to start by having each panelist provide a quick introduction of themselves. And I want to begin because I've had the opportunity to work with this organization for a number of years. You've been a long-term member of the National Health Council. And I like to begin by just telling you a little bit of my story. I became a patient advocate more than 25 years ago. I actually grew up in Maine and left home when I was 13, lived in Europe and Asia, and planned on taking a job in the European communities. Very excited about it. And then over a period of just 4 months, everyone in my family was diagnosed with one or more chronic conditions. And they ranged from heart disease, cancer, neurologic, autoimmune, rare disease, and HIV. So I ended up moving back to the United States and settling in Boston and practicing law, where I began volunteering. But I'll never forget, and I've shared this with some of you before, that I watched as my family over a span of less than 2 years all passed away. And they passed away for two different reasons. One, there were no effective treatments to deal with their conditions. It was awful to watch. And then for a group of them, they passed away even though there were highly effective treatments, but they weren't deployed effectively. And the one that I use as an example that still to this day makes me incredibly angry is that my mother, who was a primary caregiver for my father, who died of cancer, was dealing with a number of health issues, multiple chronic conditions, but she was being told by her doctor that she had anxiety as a result of my father's death. I think she probably did. But she also had classic signs of heart disease. And I spoke with her doctor on more than one occasion about this. And the night before my birthday, she called to wish me happy birthday. And I could tell she didn't sound good. I tried to get her to go to the emergency room. She refused. But she agreed to make an appointment with her doctor for the next day. Next morning when she was getting ready, she had a heart attack and died. I so appreciate what you guys do. It's incredibly important. Don't stop. So many people need what you are doing. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for your work. If you give yourself a round of applause. Thank you. I've been incredibly fortunate to work at the National Health Council, which, as you heard, is an organization of many patient advocacy organizations like yours. We work on systemic issues, issues to improve innovation, to get better treatments, and to ensure meaningful, affordable access to those treatments. We have all stakeholders in membership, certainly the patient community, but we also have the biopharmaceutical sector, device, diagnostic, generics, the payer insurance community, and many from the provider and family caregiving community. I look forward to moderating this panel. I'm going to ask my co-panelists to introduce themselves.
I'm Maryann Norling, and I live in Silicon Valley, California. I'm very honored and happy to be on this panel and representing WomenHeart. My story began a long time ago. I've been married 42 years. I have 3 married children and 1 beautiful granddaughter. In 1981, I had a massive stroke, and that sent me on almost a 3-year recovery. At that time, it was, of course, devastating. I had a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and it was really, really hard. I had no support at all. But out of that, I was forced to take up painting, any kind of art, because they thought my left side was so damaged, I was just going to be able to do arts and crafts. So I started painting, and I painted for 20 years, and I loved it. And eventually I went back to college and got my degree in ceramics. And the reason I tell you this is I really believe that when things happen to you, you can turn it around for good. So in 2013, I had a full cardio workup because my cholesterol has shot up to over 300 on a statin drug. After my full cardio workup, I was told, like many, many women, you are just fine. And 4 months later, I had a massive heart attack in beautiful Lake Tahoe. And so I was in the wilderness. And I was taken to Reno, and 2 stints later, I was angry, I was scared, and I was very unsure of myself. As I went back home and saw a cardiologist, a different cardiologist, I should say, I was encouraged that my hospital, El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, had a cardiac rehab program. And they also had a support group, not run by WomenHeart, but run by one of the nurses. And I joined that, and it really literally gave me the confidence I needed to move on with my life. So she was about ready to retire, and El Camino Hospital and the nursing staff in the cardio department still saw a real need for support for women. So 3 of us went to be trained by WomenHeart at the Mayo Clinic. So I really believe that out of things that we have no control over, we can turn it around and pay it forward. And that is what I'm trying to do with WomenHeart and in my community.
Excellent.
My name's Lindsay Wagner. I am not the bionic woman, but I will do my best to serve you in any way I can. I am an active duty officer in the United States Public Health Service, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but we do report up to the U.S. Surgeon General. So that is something I look forward to, listening to all of the questions, answering as many as I can, and taking back anything that we can. I'm obviously staffed at the Food and Drug Administration. I work in the Division of Drug Information, and we spend our day answering questions from anyone who wants to call the FDA with a question. Anything related to a drug, our phone number and email address is all over the FDA website. We're also on Facebook answering questions from people there. We really try to meet people where they are with the information that they need. So I'm really looking forward to this. And on a personal note, just listening to Maryann, I have a daughter who will be 2 very soon, and I can't imagine how life-changing that would be. And another daughter soon to be in the world. So very excited to be a part of this, and really thank you all for being such great advocates for WomenHeart.
I am Dr. Martha Gulati. I am the Chief of Cardiology at University of Arizona in Phoenix, Arizona. And I am also a board member of WomenHeart, as well as a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of WomenHeart as well. You may also know me as the editor-in-chief of CardioSmart, the patient education arm of the American College of Cardiology. And I'm honored to take part of in this panel on this important topic.
Good afternoon. I should have started that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charley John. I am the Director of Public Policy for Walgreens. I started off with the company actually 20 years ago as a pharmacist, and this is in fact my anniversary week, so I just realized that as I was looking at the date. And apparently I share the 20-year anniversary with WomenHeart that Tricia was just letting me know, so I find that all kind of lucky. I'm especially thrilled to be here. I am so proud and passionate of the profession that Lindsay and I get to represent. And I'm only equally thrilled by passion that I see in caretakers and patients and folks like you that are out there trying to help yourselves and help each other out. So it's great to be here in that regard. One thing that has been really neat in my 20 years, I've seen hundreds of patients that have been able to turn it around, like Maryann said, and that is a wonderful story. I live that on the front lines, and I'm glad to participate in this way to help out. Much has changed in the profession of pharmacy over the last 20 years. The role of a pharmacist goes well beyond dispensing. It's not just putting pills in a bottle. Today, our pharmacists are involved in administering life-saving vaccinations. We are performing health testing and health risk assessments. We are tailored counseling for medications and helping folks manage their chronic diseases. So there's a lot that has changed. And add access of a pharmacist to it. 93% of Americans live within 5 miles of a community pharmacy. So that is amazing access. And you can imagine in many areas, especially rural areas, I was surprised to find out where Martha was from in Arizona, that there is not a lot of primary care. And you can imagine that pharmacists are probably the only healthcare resource that a lot of folks have. So we are there to help out. Our mission is to really help our patients' health and well-being. And that not only starts from getting their medication, it's about doing well on their medications. And so we want to make sure that we're getting them their medications, but we're helping them get activated and they stay adherent to their medications. And there's a lot of factors that influence adherence, but you can bet that cost does rise to the top of that list. It's been alluded to by Marc that the most important thing is getting the right patient, the right drug at the right time, and cost can absolutely disrupt that. So that's why I'm here today to show how pharmacists can play a vital role in helping in this aspect of the patient care journey.
So we're going to begin a conversation about non-medical switching, but I wanted to share with the group that over the course of the last 9 months, I've been doing a listening or set of listening sessions with the CEOs of the patient advocacy organizations in membership. And what we've seen and heard repeatedly is that over the course of the last 3 years, there's been a tremendous acceleration in cost shifting and utilization management that is impacting access for people with chronic conditions across the board. What has been fascinating is that each disease area is often impacted in different ways. Some it may be high deductibles, others it may be access to a specialist. Cumulative impact is creating huge challenges for people with access. But let's begin our conversation, and Mary highlighted this with the research on non-medical switching. So Lieutenant Commander Wagner, how does the FDA define non-medical switching?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the FDA does not define non-medical switching. What the FDA does define are things related to therapeutic equivalence. So is a generic drug an appropriate substitute for a brand name drug? Does it perform the same way in the body? Can you expect the same clinical benefit? Can you expect the same safety profile? There's also biosimilars now. And interchangeable products, and those have different definitions. So there are a number of things that the FDA does define, but not medical switching. We do get a lot of calls from patients and providers who want to have these conversations and find out where does FDA's authority start and end related to some of these issues. And when it comes to non-medical switching, I usually think of therapeutic interchanges, maybe changing within a class of medications, which is outside of the definition of therapeutic equivalence that the FDA defines.
Could I ask you to give specific examples just to make that more clear? As I sit back and I remember before I became a patient advocate, equivalence and therapeutic switching probably didn't resonate for me. So can I get you to give some specific examples?
Sure. So a therapeutic equivalent would be something that the FDA would give a certain rating. So it's known as an A rating. There's a book and an app and all kinds of resources to look up those ratings. But that would be something like a rosuvastatin being equivalent to Crestor. That would be a therapeutic equivalent. Where we're talking about maybe an interchange or a substitution outside of that definition would be if somebody were to switch you from rosuvastatin to simvastatin. So you're within the same class, you're treating the same condition, but those things are not rated as therapeutically equivalent. They fall within the same class.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to take a moment to remind everybody in the audience to start writing down your questions, because we are going to come to you and your questions. And those of you on Facebook Live to send us in your questions. And I also just want to remind those of you that are at Facebook Live or on Facebook Live that you can go to WomenHeart.org to get more information during this conversation or after. Charlie John, how does non-medical switching impact pharmacists and pharmacies? And I want to, before you answer that, make a plug. Pharmacists routinely are very high, if not top of list, for the most trusted source for people with chronic conditions. So you are a hugely important, valuable ally to us.
Thank you. Number one or number two over the last 15 years. I thought I'd further your plug. No, but I'm glad to be in that category. Non-medical switching enters our realm every single day. To start, all providers, all pharmacists are dealing with this in a very significant fashion, but at the end of the day, it truly is the patient that suffers. The amount of time that pharmacists and providers spend on the authorization process, the navigation process, and helping our patients deal with this, it's staggering, the time spent, the dollars spent, and then when you consider the resultant outcomes, whether they are all positive or negative, again, those estimates are staggering, if not sobering. So it incredibly affects our kind of regular day-to-day. It is the pharmacy counter where most of this stuff manifests itself, right? You get a prescription or you're on a prescription and something all of a sudden changes. Yeah, you might have gotten a letter that was explaining it, but you only find out when you are coming to pick up your prescription and find out all of a sudden that it's not covered, or the copay has jumped by 10%, or some ridiculous figure. So it is us having to kind of navigate that situation with the patients. And what we do is to really try to help them understand, where we are in this process, what it means that the insurance or whatever it may be has made this change in their therapy, and to help them kind of navigate the next steps. It doesn't have to be that, oh, that they say you have to switch and you have to automatically switch. No, our goal is to make sure that our patients are on the right med for them. And it's not to say that that can never be something else that the doctor has originally prescribed, but it doesn't have to mean that somebody has to switch just because they say so. We want to go with clinical evidence. We want to go with evidence that there are true clinical outcomes. And our ultimate goal is an integration of patient care that brings together the physicians and the pharmacists and other healthcare professionals, and coming up with a plan so that we are promoting the best clinical solution for our patients and that we have positive therapeutic outcomes. And so working together, we're able to come up with those solutions and help our patients out.
Excellent, I appreciate that. I know I personally have had medicine switched from brand to generics. Many people in the audience or listening in on Facebook Live may have had the same experience. And it may have worked really well, or it may not. Dr. Gulati, can you explain to us why non-medical switching can become a problem?
Yeah, so, most often we have no problems when they switch a trade name drug to a generic drug. In most cases, it isn't a problem. And if it makes it cheaper for our patients, that's a good thing. And that's why we even, there's usually on our prescriptions, whether electronically or handwritten, you can say that, substitutions may be made. And we have no problem really for most drugs being generic. Where it becomes a problem is where we use a drug specifically for a reason. Let me just give you an example. Like we put people on dual antiplatelet agents after they get a stent placed. And so one of the antiplatelet agents that might be used is, sometimes we'll give you something called Plavix. But there may be a reason that you are a non-responder to Plavix. There's a genetic test that sometimes we'll do and know that you cannot be on that drug. And we need to use a different antiplatelet agent. Most of the other antiplatelet agents are more expensive. What has happened in many of us in this room, of the other cardiologists in this room, we've all written a prescription, very specific, you need to be on this drug. Hopefully we've also spent the time explaining it to our patient why this drug can't be changed. They go and they get their prescription, and without even contacting a physician, they just give the alternate drug, the cheaper drug, to the patient. Now, some patients may be very well informed and be able to advocate for themselves and say, no, this is not the drug I need. But many people might just think, oh, is this the generic version? Okay, I'll take that, And then their clot, they can develop a thrombosis or a clot in where we put the stent in. So it ends up, not only do they get hospitalized, they might die, they might have another procedure. I mean, these things that are done to save money, essentially the reason they do non-medical switching is to save money. And yet, the costs become huge in many different ways, just by them not asking why this drug is specific, like making that decision independently without even communicating. And this can happen for our patients without even talking to us. We may not even know it happened. And I think that's one example where it can be very costly and potentially threaten the life of a patient. And we see this like this, of course, as a cardiologist, we'll focus on the cardiology issues, but there's many other drugs that get switched in this way. And there is some patients who will be really smart. We think like, okay, well, I'm gonna look next year when I choose my health plan, I'm gonna make sure that my drug is on the formulary. And that way I'll know if the copay, maybe it's still a trade name drug, so I'm gonna have to pay a higher copay, but I know they cover it. The thing with non-medical switching that we're finding, and this just happened to a patient of mine just 2 weeks ago, was that it was on her formulary. But this switching happened in March. or April. So she went in to get her drug and then was told it's no longer covered. So it's no longer that they have to wait for a year or till, you know, they make their formulary books and then that lasts good for the whole year and maybe you'll get some notice at the end of the year. It can happen randomly. These health management companies are looking to cut costs, and they'll keep looking all through the year to see what they can do. I have no problem with making healthcare more affordable, but this isn't the way. This isn't the way that's going to protect our patients in any way, shape, or form.
Dr. Gulati, you touched on the patient-doctor relationship. Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, that's the essence of medicine. It's the essence of what we do every day. Our shared decision-making, our patient and physician relationship is the key to what we do. We need to be sharing. Our patients, first of all, need to be engaged in the decision about everything about healthcare, whether it's choosing a drug, whether it's choosing to undergo a procedure. All of it, we should be talking about what are the benefits, what are the risks, and what are the personal goals of our therapy. You know, everybody has a different set of values and a different set of things that are important to them. And that needs to be part of our conversation. So I think that ends up that we need to be, as physicians, not just telling people, here, take this drug, but telling them why. So the example that I used is that if we don't inform people why this drug specifically needs to be given to you, and should anyone try to change it on you, do not, you know, don't let this happen. If we don't give that extra information, a patient can't be their own advocate, and ultimately it does come down to them.
I really appreciate how you frame that. At the National Health Council, we call it the chronic care trifecta. And we do that because people focus in on a clinical outcome, but often in the absence, as you say, the goals of the patients or their personal circumstances. The reality is none of us are average, and we have to be careful about how we think about delivering care. One of the examples I use is of a woman I met in Baltimore who was a single mom, had diabetes and heart disease. She was not being compliant and adherent with her treatment regimen. She didn't like seeing her doctors because they kept telling her, you're eating too much and you're gaining weight and you're not being compliant. Nobody took the time to really understand what her goals were. And when you asked her, it became very clear. She was a single mom and she was living to make sure that her daughters didn't become single moms without a college education like her. That was her sole purpose in life, and she had one daughter in high school, one in college, and she was the sole provider for them. When she was compliant with the health regimen she was on, which was completely first in class as a clinical treatment, it made her lightheaded and dizzy. And you might say, well, that's a small price to pay. The challenge was she drove a bus in Baltimore and she couldn't provide for her children. Simply understanding the goals and the circumstances of the patient happening in that relationship with your doctor is critically important. Maryann, you shared your story a few moments ago, but you've also had a story or a challenge with non-medical switching.
Yes, I did. In January, I went to fill my statin drug, and I have always used a drug savings card because it's a brand name drug. I have in the past, for 30 plus years, had taken a generic drug that obviously was not successful in my heart disease. And so they switched me to a brand name, my doctors did. And so I presented my card, and they came back. They said that would be $70 for, and it's a 30-day supply. I said, what? That's like $2 a pill. And so I said, well, try this card. And that was rejected. So I left without my prescription, which I was out of. I went home. went on the computer, printed out a new card, went back. That was rejected too. I left again without my prescription. I called my doctor's office, and they made sure that I was pre-approved for this drug, this name brand Stanton. My insurance company approved it. My doctor approved it. So I went back to the pharmacy. I said, what's going on here? They said, we don't know. So then I called the drug manufacturer, and they said that your card is no longer valid in the state of California. And at that point, I'm like 19 days in without my Stanton drug, which is not good. And I was leaving for Utah the next day, so I thought, well, I'm just going to forget it and deal with it when I get back. So I went to Utah to visit my children, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I can get my prescription. I'm always looking for the angle, right? I'm going to see if I can get my prescription transferred. And I went into a pharmacy. Sure enough, they transferred my prescription. I presented my drug savings card from the manufacturer, and they said, that will be $3. I said, what? 3? No, 30. No, 3. Not only did I get my prescription for $3, I got it for a 90-day supply of the name brand. And I will back up just a little bit. What I found out is in the state of California, it was signed into law that you can no longer use a drug savings card when there is a generic available. For me, generic did not work. Perhaps maybe there is another generic, but we as heart survivors, we hate messing around with our medication when something works. And I didn't have time to find out if something else works, because I know this name brand Stanton works for me. And so what this boils down to, if I had kept my prescription in California, it would cost me $840 a year for my Stanton drug. I can fly to Utah and have it cost me $12 a year. And I can tell my children, that's the reason I'm coming to visit you again, right?
The consummate mom, I love
Yes,
that.
yes, that's another angle, right?
Thank you for sharing that. Lieutenant Commander Wagner, there's a long road from when a medicine or a generic goes to the FDA, leaves the FDA, and lands on the pharmacist counter. What is the role of the FDA, and what is not the role?
Yeah, it's a question I could probably talk about all day. But related to a lot of what we're talking about here, the FDA's role is to enforce the laws that are passed. So I know I've been talking with some of the folks here about the amazing work that you're doing, going to the Hill, speaking with representatives. So the FDA's role is to enforce those laws that you can advocate for. So to Maryann's point, there can be state laws that are outside of the federal government, and that certainly is outside of the FDA's role. Our other role is to really look at the rules that are in place and make sure they're being used appropriately. Are people trying to sort of game the system? Are there areas in our scope where we can make improvements under the rules that we currently have? We have a commissioner now who has been very innovative in looking at generic drug pricing and the ways to lower those costs, doing a lot of research in how many generics need to be approved before that price really does drop and the savings are passed on to the patient. So some new things that have happened in the past year is trying to expedite the review of the first 3 generic drugs, because that's where we really see the cost savings comes down. When that first single generic's on the market, there isn't a whole lot of competition to drive that price. But that scope is pretty narrow. And the commissioner is a doctor, a physician by training. People I work with, like Charley was saying, I'm a pharmacist by training, and we have some of that experience that we were saying, it never leaves you, that idea that the patients were coming in and you're on the phone with the insurance company all day and you're trying to negotiate and try to figure out what's best. But a lot of that does fall outside of the role of the FDA. So we are looking at anything we can do within the rules that we have to make sure that they're being used appropriately. We are doing everything within that scope that we can to improve anything related to price. We do know with non-medical switching that a lot of it is a price conversation. And then outside of that role is a lot. And what we do on the phone with patients all the time is try to figure out, well, who is that place? Is this something that's anti-competitive that goes to the Federal Trade Commission? Is this something that the drug manufacturer can help with? You can ask them the question. So we try to get people to the right place, even when the right place isn't us.
I appreciate that. How many people are familiar with the new director at FDA, Scott Gottlieb, Dr. Scott Gottlieb? I see a few people. Really, really terrific person. It's the second time he's been at FDA, first time as the director. Truly has taken on a very activist role at the FDA on this and many other issues. I think he will go down in history as perhaps the most activist in certainly many, many decades. One of the issues that the patient community looked at the National Health Council was, how can you drive the costs of health down, including for the drugs we all take? And one of the interesting learnings was that there were hundreds of policies being promoted. Very few had data to show support that they would work. And the one that had great data was competition. And this commissioner has done a lot to really drive competition in a positive direction. We've received a number of questions from the audience, and there's a theme that runs through, and I'm going to give this question to Dr. Gulati. How can we solve some of the challenges being created by non-medical switching?
Well, it's a hard question because there's no one simple solution. I think that groups like this, like WomenHeart, as well as physician groups, as well as other advocacy groups, need to work with these healthcare organizations to make them understand that policies that they put forth that affect patients, how do they affect them? We understand that they want to reduce costs, and we're on the same page. We want to reduce costs for our patients. But we also need them to understand when we don't have control over certain drugs' pricing, but the drug is necessary, that it shouldn't just indiscriminately happen that they change drugs on our patients. So I think if they understood more, they do understand. I mean, I do know that ultimately it's coming down to cost, but how they're making their decisions isn't really involving the patient and isn't involving the physician. If they want to become physicians, then they should go to medical school. But they cannot just tell people that because this is not happening in anybody's partnership. It's just happening in isolation. So I think there needs to be more conversations and dialogues with the healthcare organizations. And I wish that they were here at the table too, to hear this.
Charley, John, I'm going to ask you a similar question. How can the pharmacists help in assisting some of the challenges being created by non-medical switching?
Sure. I sort of see, the pharmacist as sort of a complement to what Martha said, and add to the patient-doctor relationship. The pharmacist works to complement that and be a really good communicator of information. There's a lot going on around drug pricing. We've all heard that. We're anticipating an announcement this week, and we'll see where that comes. And a lot of that goes into what Maryann just described. We've seen very rapid pace to the drug pricing policy as it relates to copay cards and things of that nature. What I would say on that regard is that there needs to be balance to a lot of these policies. Maybe there's something around a copay card for a brand drug that has a less expensive generic. But in Maryann's specific patient case, there has to be something that accommodates that. We can go for lower cost and lower effective cost, but you need to maintain the outcomes. You have to have equivalent outcomes. So if you can show me that, then I think we can have a conversation. Because I think in this whole, drug formulary conversation and all, the primary and preeminent goal should be around facilitating quality. Ensure we can select medications that are less expensive, and they could add value and be cost effective, but quality and patient outcomes has to remain first and foremost. So how pharmacists, again, help to address is to be a complement there and communicate information. It's such a confusing and concerning time and very uncertain time. So trying to provide as much information to help them through that process. I think about Maryann's story with the statin. I'm recalling a patient that I used to see when I was a pharmacist on the bench, a diabetic patient who had just started. It was a type 2 patient that was on oral medications and had to transition over to insulin because her blood glucose wasn't getting under control. So I sort of helped navigate that process and starting an insulin, switching to a different insulin, and that whole process. I'm recalling spending weekly sessions with my patient to discuss her new blood glucose monitor, about self-management, what the results mean, and let's go over that. And on a weekly basis, we would connect with her physician and talked about adjustments to her insulin dose. Well, it took us about 4 weeks of adjustments and communications to get her on track. I think about 19 days that Maryann was on that statin. That's pretty close to a dangerous point of not being on your statin medication when you're a heart patient. And can you imagine 4 weeks, me spending weekly time with this patient to get their insulin controlled? That's not typical. Typically what you see is the patient may have to wait till their follow-up appointment, perhaps every 3 months, and then maybe having to navigate the situation with their insurance to say, hey, this medication's not working. We have to switch to this medication. We have to adjust this dose, so you have to give me an authorization. We could be talking about years before a patient is on their right insulin dose to keep their blood glucose under control. I don't have to tell you, if a patient goes with uncontrolled blood glucose for a couple years, what kind of bad situation they're going to be in. So those are the areas that we can really see and kind of adapt quickly to. Like I said, pharmacists are everywhere. They're five miles away from anybody sitting in this room. And we can see patients on a very regular basis. And to see those little changes that occur in their therapy that we can maybe quickly adapt to and connect with the physicians and start making a plan and getting there. And from there, if we need to go all in on the prior authorization process, we'll go ahead and do that. We'll work on things like the manufacturer copay assistance. We'll work on coupon cards. We'll facilitate patient assistance funds for our folks. I used to work in a specialty pharmacy setting, and boy, this doesn't manifest itself more than that place right there. We're talking about the highest cost medications, the most complex of medications that require a lot of extra care. Not only we're dealing with the confluence of your pharmacy and medical benefits, so it just becomes extremely confusing. So we are there to be helpful in that aspect. Folks, especially you think about our Medicare population, they are just overwhelmed with the information during that enrollment process, right? The plans, the deductibles, tiers, formularies, coverage gap. Boy, I mean, your head is spinning. So pharmacists are really ideally positioned to work right there, explain to our patients medication by medication, copay by copay, annual cost, to get them on the best foot forward so that they succeed on their therapy.
So I'm going to run through a few of the questions we've received from the audience and remind those of you on Facebook Live, send your questions to us. I'm going to touch on something you picked up on, Charlie John, and that is the communication side. Is there anything that needs to be done to enhance the communication options between people picking up their drugs and their pharmacists?
Well, I would say that there's interesting policy sometimes in the insurance world / your benefit managers that organize it. A lot of times, when a pharmacist is there dealing with a patient that comes with a $70, was it $70, Maryann? A $70 copay, sometimes a pharmacist is restricted right there from going any further, from discussing options and from discussing, what the cash price may be or just alternatives in general. There's a restriction in place there, and that sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous, but it's true. And it goes against everything that pharmacists are there. We are there to help our patients do well on their medications, and being able to afford them is a big part of that. And so for us not to be able to go over those options, it can be really limiting in that space. So there is efforts in the public policy realm to address situations like that.
Excellent. And I know this group is going to work at their tables on potential solutions in a few moments. This is a challenging, complex issue, which creates a lot of issues. I think we all want low-cost, affordable health care, but we also want to make sure that we have policies and rules in place that are not so blunt that they create problems. Again, I'm going to hit a couple of questions to you, Lieutenant Commander Wagner. I'm combining those last two together. From the audience, they're asking, how does a cardiovascular generic differ from a standard drug?
I guess a standard drug would have to be defined, because that's another thing we don't define.
I think they mean brand.
Okay. A generic drug is the same, as long as it's deemed a therapeutic equivalent, to the reference listed drug or the brand name drug in several ways. So first, it's a pharmaceutical equivalent, which means that it has the same active ingredient, it has the same dosage form, it has the same route of administration, and it has the same strength. From there, it has to perform in a bioequivalent manner in the body. So that would mean that some of the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic aspects of the drug are the same. In essence, you should get the same clinical effect. You should expect the same safety profile from that product. Things that can differ can be things like inactive ingredients. So, for example, if there's a lactose filler in a certain generic medication and you are lactose intolerant, that's something that we want to make sure you're aware of. There would be probably some generic options that don't have that inactive ingredient and some that do. So that's another important communication piece. That information is usually available easily online. We can help you find it. Your pharmacist can also help you select that medication, hopefully order the right generic product for you as an individual. But the generic for the population as a whole, if it's approved as being therapeutically equivalent, should give you the same clinical effect, and it should offer you the same safety profile.
So while I have you, I'm going to ask a related question, and that is, how does FDA standardize the effectiveness between different generic manufacturers?
So each generic that applies for approval to the FDA against the brand name drug or the reference listed drug has to perform within a mathematical calculation of that bioequivalence standard. That standard is very rigorous. There's a lot of misinterpretations of those standards. I won't give a lesson on biostatistics and all of that, but each one is being compared to the reference listed drug, which is usually the brand name drug. In between, the variability between the generic products can be the same as the difference between a batch of brand name drug. So the variability, you should not have any more variability, and we ensure that you don't have any more variability between two different generic manufacturers than you would picking up a prescription of a brand name drug 1 month and coming back and getting the brand name drug the next month. And anytime anyone has a situation like that, that's absolutely what we want to hear. We want to investigate those types of complaints. Anytime something is ineffective, anytime there's a side effect, we have the MedWatch safety reporting program. That phone number rings into my office. You might talk to me on the phone and give that side effect report, or let me know that that drug isn't working. There have been certain situations over time where we have heard from patients that a product isn't working. And so that A rating that I discussed can be downgraded, and we say that drug is not generically substitutable for that product. And we work with the manufacturer to either demonstrate that it is and make some corrections, or take that product off the market. So it's very important to let the FDA know, let your provider know, let your pharmacist know when something isn't working for you.
So I'm going to direct the next two questions to Dr. Gulati and to Charley John. One is, can hospitals and nursing homes switch out medications? I'll let you start with that, and then I'll hit you with the second question.
The answer is yes.
So we've got a clear answer. How many people have experienced that?
Sometimes we'll have things in our hospital, a different version, and then something else becomes available and they'll substitute it with the pharmacy in the hospital. I don't know nursing homes as well, but I assume a very similar process of approval goes through of what they will take and what we will have and what we'll substitute when things are not available.
Yeah, I'll follow on. I mean, they will both sort of follow kind of a formulary process, and there's a lot that goes into developing that. There's certainly soundness to that, but again, it comes to some of that balance I described about. You have to accommodate situations that don't fit neatly into a formulary, and make sure that every unique patient is taken care of. So
Charley John, I'll start with you on this one. Is mail order cheaper for people than going to their local pharmacies? It could in some cases. It's not in other cases. I worked in the pharmacy at a time where the 90-day supplies that Maryann alluded to was becoming more and more prevalent, and that is helpful to us to promote adherence with our patients. And many times you're able to get that same 90-day supply at the same exact cost that you would to going to a mail order pharmacy. So the copay that you would pay is exactly the same. So it's very beneficial to our patients. They get to maintain that face-to-face touch with the pharmacist, get their medication, get to learn about other programs that promote adherence. So there's some real value in being able to do that at the pharmacy counter.
The cost is very unpredictable, I think, for most patients. And even as somebody who goes and picks up my husband's antihypertensive medications, we're sometimes told, like, take it mail order. But then you come to the pharmacy and one day, you had a $5 copay, and then the next time you come and suddenly it's a $15 for something that I know was pennies. So can you explain how can patients be, even shop around? I have other patients tell me if I just tell them I have no insurance, it's cheaper than me saying I have insurance. It's almost gaming the system, but it's not really gaming. I mean, it's their money.
Yeah, that is truly where the complexities come in. We're dealing with first a health insurance, then we're going to be dealing with a pharmacy benefit manager in the middle of that. Then you have your employee-based health insurance, and all of it kind of flows in a very kind of complex schedule. And that's why there's so much unknown when you do come to the pharmacy counter. So I absolutely agree that that's where that is. And that's why some of the drug pricing stuff is trying to explore that, unveil it, and figure out better ways to do it. Where I say we go back is to, again, be very intense in providing information and communication, especially when it comes to enrollment time, both if you're on a health insurance exchange program or if you're in a Medicare Part D program, going through those plans based on your medications, and knowing that this is exactly what it's going to cost you this year, or this is the plan that will have a benefit that can accommodate this medication. We print out personalized reports for our patients to help them know that, okay, every one of my medications is covered, and this is how the copay is going to be. And so that's sort of the best thing that we can do, and all this stuff that's happening, behind the scenes. we're hoping that there will be, again, policy in the right direction. I think there's some real things that can be done. What Lindsay was explaining, what's going on at the FDA, and encouraging competition and getting more products for patients to benefit from will definitely reduce prices. I think we see some things around e-prescribing and e-prior authorizations that can really speed up the process and help patients get their medications quicker. I think, it may be a niche area, but Marc, I know at the National Health Council, they really look at it, the outcomes-based contracts with drugs, and this is basically paying for a drug on if it really works or not. That sounds like a novel idea. So I think they're working towards that, but that really is kind of all of us putting our money where our mouth is. If the drug works, then it should be paid for. And that's the true measure of success. It works for the patients. They are getting better.
So you picked up on something I think is incredibly important. How many people in the room think cost is a problem? Yeah. Okay. I thought as much. I also wanted to give you an opportunity to exercise a little bit, right? I think this last discussion is incredibly important. The complete lack of transparency in health is very, very challenging. As somebody who's a patient advocate, I hear all the time people say, well, those damn patients, they need to have some skin in the game. And I'll tell you, there's nothing that makes me more angry because you know what? We got arms, we got legs, we got whole body parts in the game. And we can't be informed consumers no matter how hard we try. It's one of the greatest challenges, and I think it's one of the opportunities I would encourage you to think about at your table. If we had transparency, how would this be different? I've heard a lot of people say, we just need Uber to come in and take care of health. I wish they would, but the reality is Uber was able to come in and deal with transparency because the different silos within it works were transparent. In health, they're not transparent. A product is approved at the FDA, whether it be a brand or a generic, and then it goes into the system. We have lack of clarity in how it moves from the company that makes it through the PBM that negotiates its pricing, through the insurance company that also negotiates its pricing, till it gets on the pharmacist's counter. And that's when we find out what the cost is. I would encourage us to think about that, because Uber can actually make a difference if we have transparency. I'm going to ask the final question. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to respond, and I'm going to start with Dr. Gulati. And it says, how can patients be more empowered? And I'm going to give you a related question, because I never want to lose an opportunity here. Should patients get the drug their doctor prescribed?
So, all these hard questions. How the patient should be more empowered is, I think that we need, as people living in this society, we should be insisting on knowing and the costs up front. I mean, there should not be that you need to shop around for it. There's all kinds of apps out there. If things aren't covered, you can look at which pharmacy is the cheapest. You should be able to know the cost, and it changes day by day is what I see myself and what I know and hear from my patients. We don't even know if our health plan that we might have chosen smartly, as you were saying, looking at it, and it can change, maybe not for Medicare, but it can change for other people mid-year. Any random time, they can take something away. We should be the voice out there, as some of you are going to Capitol Hill in the next 2 days, talking with them that you want transparency. You want to know what your drugs are going to cost. And I think also to empower our patients to be able to know, part of it comes from us as physicians and pharmacists explaining why you're on a drug, what it's used for, and why you can or cannot be on generics. I don't think anybody's tied to not giving you a cheaper version of a drug if it works. But when you're on something specific, that you should be entitled to receive that drug. And I think that it all comes to how do we want healthcare in our future. Personally, and this is my bias, but I believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I believe in a one-payer system, and I think that would force transparency and reduce costs. So that's what I would advocate for. I'm Canadian with those qualifications.
Charlie John, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. And I agree with everything. Sorry, not the actual policies you said, but just the idea. I had to catch myself, right? What am I signing up for? No, I think, for patients, it's really taking a cue from the room here. Get excited about your health and be totally in charge of it. You all are doing that. I'm not sure if everybody knows to do that. And then have those conversations with providers from that perspective. And it'll give me a whole new idea as a pharmacist to say, like, wow, this is not just me saying, hey, this is a generic, it's gonna work the same, don't worry about it. No, it's about having a meaningful conversation on what is the best therapy for you. And I think if you get them excited in that way, Marc, you alluded to things that are basically in that category of the social determinants of health. I think we often sort of ignore that as providers sometimes in having those meaningful conversations so that we can learn the true story of what's happening with our patients so that we can help them in the best way. Again, I appreciate the excitement I see in the room. I hope that spreads, and I hope that we have meaningful conversations at our doctor's offices, at our pharmacy counters, and get people on the right path to better health.
Lieutenant Commander Wagner?
Yeah, I know we talk a lot about cost, and I sometimes joke that our division, we're the service you already paid for. We're taxpayer funded, so if you have a question, sometimes it's easier to call the FDA, and we can help you understand some of the terminology that's being used. We have patients send us letters, take a picture of the letter that you received, and we'll help explain what that means. And is that something that the FDA has control over? Who should you talk to about that next? What are your options? My dad came into town this weekend to visit, and he said, car insurance, the rental counters now, they say, do you want the basic insurance or the premium? And he said, well, no, I want the no insurance. I'm told to decline the insurance. So sometimes you're given two choices, but really there's a third option that nobody's talking to you about. So sometimes we feel like that's the role that we can play. You've already paid for our services. You can call us anytime. And we can mail out prescribing information. You can take that to your doctor. We can give you drug safety communications. There's a lot of good information that's easily accessible, and there's a lot of bad information that's easily accessible. So helping you get the right information that will help you facilitate that conversation, whether it's at the pharmacy counter or it's in your doctor's office, that's something that I hope we can take away as well.
Thank you. So I want to say the best for last. Maryann, you get the last word.
Okay.
What would you like to see change?
I think transparency. I don't like being blindsided. None of us do. I am frustrated that my pharmacy didn't know. My doctor didn't know. The insurance company didn't have a clue, because actually my insurance company that is my copay with $70. So my brand name is very expensive. So they were picking up some of the costs. I am frustrated because I don't know how to fight the state of California. And not everyone has the luxury of going to a different state to get a prescription. I just happen to think that maybe that would work. But maybe in the future that may not work in that state, because my understanding is a lot of states are going that way, where you cannot use the copay card or the drug savings card. And I agree that if something works, you should be able to get it at a reasonable cost. This is not the only medication I take. This is one of many. And, but it's one of the more important ones. So I would like to see transparency, and an avenue how can I to tell me, can I get this drug through mail savings using my copay card because they're out of state? I don't know the answer to that.
So we're coming to the end, and I want to say this is an incredibly complex issue, as you all know. I think we can all agree we want people to have affordable access to products that work for them, that give them the outcomes that are clinically relevant, but also relevant to them personally. I want to take the time again to thank the audience, thank the group on Facebook Live, encourage you to go to womenheart.org with any questions or to look for more information. But most of all, join me in thanking a fabulous panel. Thank you.